Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a machine that is frankly way more than just metal, rubber, and petrol. We're exploring a motorcycle so deeply embedded in Indian cultural consciousness that its exhaust note alone still turns heads decades later. There was a time when the mere sound of a motorcycle could command the attention of an entire street. It was a machine that completely defied its own specifications, becoming so universally beloved that its name is entirely synonymous with raw, unadulterated street heritage. We're talking, of course, about the Yamaha RX100. Let's dive right in and uncover exactly how this machine conquered the roads.
Which brings up a really fascinating paradox, right? How exactly did a tiny 98cc bike become India's biggest street legend? When you think of dominant street machines, you usually picture massive, roaring engines with huge displacement figures and an imposing physical presence. But this was a small, unassuming machine on paper that somehow transformed into an unstoppable cultural phenomenon. To really understand how this happened, we have to travel back in time and look at the landscape of the world it was born into.
So let's get into Section 1, the ordinary world and the disruption.
To really grasp this disruption, you gotta look at the motorcycling landscape back in the 1980s. Commuter bikes back then, they were heavy, sluggish, and honestly built almost entirely just for mileage and practical longevity. They were reliable workhorses that got you from point A to point B, sure, but they were undeniably boring. Then, boom! In 1985, Yamaha partners with the Escorts Group and essentially drops a bomb on the market, the RX100. It wasn't just some slightly better alternative, it was a lightweight rocket offering explosive acceleration and a raw, untamed riding experience. People simply hadn't experienced anything quite like it off a showroom floor before.
A huge piece of this puzzle is its weight, just 100 kilograms. To put that into perspective, that is actually lighter than most modern automatic scooters you see zipping around today. In a market that was just flooded with heavy metal, this featherweight design meant unparalleled agility. It made the bike ridiculously easy to control. You could carve through dense traffic like it was nothing, and crucially, it meant that every single ounce of power generated by that engine translated directly into rapid, uninterrupted forward momentum. And then you combine that 100-kilogram frame with a tiny 98cc engine. Now, by traditional metrics, 98cc is an absolute featherweight. But thanks to the absolute magic of the two-stroke design, twisting that throttle triggered an explosive power delivery. The power-to-weight ratio was so wildly skewed in the rider's favor that this little engine easily outperformed a lot of the bigger, heavier motorcycles of its time. The physics just worked beautifully. Minimal mass combined with immediate power delivery made every single twist of the throttle an absolute revelation.
Moving on to Section 2, the Golden Age, cultivating a fierce loyalty.
This obsession, it was driven by a perfect storm of sensory and mechanical traits. It had this extreme pickup and a sharp, aggressive two-stroke exhaust note that, honestly, became the literal soundtrack for an entire generation. Under the hood, it was beautifully raw. No overbearing electronics stepping in, just a pure, visceral connection between you and the machine. And for the gearheads, the engine architecture was brilliantly simple. Mechanics and college kids alike quickly realized how incredibly tunable it was. Just modifying the exhaust or tweaking the engine porting allowed you to squeeze out every last drop of performance, totally transforming a quick street bike into an absolute track terror.
But things couldn't last forever. Section 3, the fall, when emissions killed the legend.
See, the antagonist of our story wasn't some rival brand. It was environmental reality. The two-stroke engine was basically a double-edged sword. The very same mechanics that generated that untamed speed, that brilliant power delivery, and that iconic, sharp sound, well, they simultaneously produced high levels of smoke and emissions. The simple mechanics that gave the RX100 its magic and its soul were also its fatal flaw in a rapidly modernizing world that was, rightly so, finally waking up to serious environmental concerns.
Looking at the timeline, from its glorious, disruptive launch in 1985, the bike rode a massive, undisputed wave of popularity. But by the 1990s, stricter emission norms in India really started closing in. Now Yamaha tried to adapt, trying to keep the lineage alive by introducing upgraded models like the RXG and the RX135 just to meet the new regulations. But the original unfiltered magic was slowly being suffocated. Eventually, production ground to a halt entirely. It felt like the definitive end of the road for a street icon. Yet, against all odds, an unkillable cult status slowly took over.
Which brings us to Section 4, the resurrection, an unkillable cult following.
It is a staggering reality that today, an original RX100 actually costs significantly more than some brand new motorcycles rolling right off the assembly line. I mean, why is that? Because original owners absolutely refuse to part with them. Collectors are out there hunting down authentic models with fierce determination, and skilled mechanics are painstakingly restoring rusted, damaged frames back to showroom glory, piece by piece. The value of a pristine RX100 completely defies normal vehicle depreciation. It just keeps going up year after year.
To really understand this kind of absurd price tag, you have to realize that buyers are not just acquiring a bike. They are buying pure nostalgia. We've essentially shifted away from mechanical engineering and crossed right over into human psychology. Buyers are paying for emotion. Sitting on an RX100 today reminds riders of their youth, the feeling of unfiltered freedom, and the golden days of Indian motorcycling. They aren't paying for a reliable commuter vehicle to just get to the office. They are paying for a literal time machine.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the uncertain future. Can the magic return? Fans have continually begged Yamaha for a revival, but the modern dilemma here is massive. There's this impossible tension between the original magic, the raw power, the smell of premix, and the sharp sound of a two-stroke, and modern reality. Today's strict environmental regulations effectively put a traditional two-stroke street bike in a museum. Recreating that specific untamed soul under modern four-stroke engineering constraints and heavy emission standards is a monumental, if not totally impossible, engineering hurdle. Which leaves us with one really lingering question to think about. Can a heavily regulated modern RX100 ever truly feel like the raw original? If you take away the two-stroke engine and that iconic sound, can the heartbeat of an entire generation actually survive in today's highly sanitized, emission-controlled world? It remains unanswered. But one thing is absolutely certain. One kick, one sound of that original exhaust echoing down an alleyway, and the legend instantly comes alive all over again. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.